Before we begin, we have a very special film brought to you all the way from the Capitol.
Hello. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Dove, and I really love The Hunger Games. I've been talking about it on TikTok for the past 2 years or so, but with everything going on over there, I thought I'd go ahead and make the jump to long-form content. I obviously have a lot to say anyways, don't I? You know how long this video is. You clicked on it. So I studied cultural geography in college, and I find the frameworks within the field to be so interesting and applicable to so many different situations. When I reread The Hunger Games for the first time as an adult, which was in March of 2023, Netflix put all of the movies on there, and all of a sudden everybody was talking about the series again. As much as I loved it when I was a kid, nothing compared to how much I love it now, being an adult and fully understanding the entire context and all of the nuance that's included in the story. But when I was doing that reread, I was fascinated by all of the ways that place and identity are intertwined throughout it. And I was like, man, I really want to read a paper on that. Surely somebody has already written it. They hadn't. So then I spent the next 6 months of my life compiling all of that together into what is essentially a mini thesis. This is about 22,000 words. But there's a lot of stuff that I couldn't fit into that. This video is going to be the first in what I plan on being a 14-part series that focuses specifically on each district and the capital. And it will cover the human and cultural and physical geography of Panem. Now, obviously, this video is super long, so I'm going to go ahead and put timestamps in the description so you can jump around to different sections if you want to watch it in more than one sitting. It is a lot longer than I had initially intended, but the reason for that is as I was doing research for this video, I just kept finding more interesting connections, and it felt silly to not include them for time's sake. That's why I'm coming to YouTube. There's no time limit. In this video, you're going to get a sampling of Salt Lake City's most impressive tourist attractions, as well as their city planning considerations, multiple lessons in Utah history, a biography of Coriolanus Snow's long ago ancestor and narrative twin, a crash course on Mormon values and sensibilities, a fun with flags segment, an analysis of capital style and culture, and a quick lesson on folk linguistics. There's probably more that I'm missing, but we're gonna do it together. If you like this kind of content, please be sure to like this video and subscribe. It really helps me out. And I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you want to go ahead and let me know which district you think I should do next, I would also love to hear that. We need to address the elephant in the room, which is the canon map that's used in the movies. I kind of hate this map. I do hate this map. If you're looking at Panem textually, the information that's included in the books shows so much care and consideration for where each district is placed. It overlaps a lot with current day industry, culture, and historical context. And while it's clear Suzanne Collins put a lot of thought into that placement, I find it incredibly frustrating how clear it is that the maps that were given to represent it did not have that kind of care and consideration. I am a graphic designer as my day job, and I know exactly what happened, which is whoever was working then for various promotional stuff was simply tasked with creating a map. They were given the general location of each district and then told that this is an eroded future North America. And they heard eroded and they said, okay, cool, let's just take it about an inch off all coastlines, which is not how that would happen. I am planning to eventually make a video where I redesign this map with like cartography principles actually included, but in the meantime, this is what we have. So if you look at this map, you will see that the capital is located in current day Wyoming. It's not. It's not actually. But when we're talking about where the capital is, there is one fan theory that has just completely taken over. And it has taken over to the point that people are like correcting other people as if it's canon. It isn't. Okay, but a lot of people think that the capital is located in Denver. Specifically, I've seen a lot of arguments that it's the Denver International Airport. So the reasoning for this is typically twofold. Number one, Proponents of this headcanon cite that the airport already serves as a shelter for catastrophic events and is somewhere people would flock to in fallout, be it meteorological or political. And then they also use the airport's existing and extensive network of underground tunnels as additional evidence. I'm gonna be honest here, I think the argument about the tunnels is a little bit silly just because it's moot. Like, most cities in the US and worldwide already have an existing network of tunnels. Like, there are lots of reasons to have tunnels. Like, you can even book tours to explore a lot of them. Obviously, there's the infamous Paris catacombs, but like, even here in Portland, you can tour the Shanghai tunnels. Seattle has the Seattle Underground. There are catacombs in Indianapolis, of all places. There's extensive tunnel systems in Kansas City, LA, Boston, Chicago, Las Vegas, and literally so many other places. It's not like special or uncommon. And then I also think that a lot of people who really push this theory just haven't read the books in a long time and are misremembering information that's presented in the text. Yes, Katniss says that the Capitol is located in what used to be known as the Rocky Mountains. And for a lot of people, when they think of the Rockies, they think of Denver, and this is enough for them to take that idea and run with it. One new argument I had not heard until I started talking about it on TikTok recently was a growing body of people who do really seem to believe that the Capitol is located in Wyoming. I had one commenter that was like, it has to be Laramie. Has to be Laramie. So I googled Laramie because I've never heard of it before. It has a population of 32,000 people. I don't think that's going to be a major urban center. Now, I don't want to fully dismiss people's ideas that are different than mine, but still technically fall within the realm of possibility. But at the end of this video, I do hope that you're going to be pretty convinced that the Capitol is in fact the future of what we now call Salt Lake City. So before we fully dive in, we are going to discuss what we know from the text. As you can see, I have lots of little flags here. This is the copy that I annotated when I was writing this. So this is from page 59 in the first book. As the door swings shuts behind him, the car goes dark. There are still a few lights inside, but outside, it's as if night has fallen again. I realize we must be in the tunnels that run through the mountains into the Capitol. The mountains form a natural barrier between the Capitol and eastern districts. It's almost impossible to enter from the east except through the tunnels. This geographical advantage was a major factor in the districts losing the war that led to my being a tribute today. Since the rebels had to scale the mountains, they were easy targets for Capitol air forces. So, starting off, there's the simple fact that the Capitol is pretty far west. In fact, there are only 2 districts that are further west than it, and one that is immediately south, which are districts 7, 4, and then District 5. So, the vast majority of people who would have been fighting in this war had no choice but to come from the east. And then on top of that, there's the added issue that the 2 districts directly east of the Capitol are loyalist districts, 1 and 2, where the citizens aren't unilaterally siding with the rebels. The rail system that would have granted access wasn't a feasible point of entry because Capitol sympathizers had it locked down. But all this to say, the Capitol cannot possibly be Denver because Denver is east of the Rocky Mountains. I know people think of Denver as being in the mountains because it has a very high elevation, but it's not. The mountains are like an hour away, an hour and a half, I don't remember. Really, Denver is high because it's on a high elevation plateau, but it's on a flat plateau. But Salt Lake City is pretty comfortable at the base of the valley. Forgive me if I say this wrong. Let me know. Salt Lake City has the Wasatch Mountains directly to the north and east, which is a sub-range of the Rockies. And then to the west is the Ochre Mountains. That one I know I said right because it automatically gave me a pronunciation. And then on top of that, there are plenty of details revealed within Ballad that do support my theory that we're going to get into. But before we do that, let's get some basic info laid out about the Salt Lake City of today before I start talking about the Salt Lake City of tomorrow. So present-day Salt Lake City's identity and physical attributes are inseparable from the proliferation of Mormon culture in the region. It was settled by Mormons, built by and for Mormons, and serves as Mormonism's primary cultural hub. Temple Square is a 10-acre complex in the heart of downtown with a host of facilities used by church members, and it's also a popular tourist destination due to its ornate white marble and granite buildings. So twice each year, Mormon leaders and church members from across the globe meet for the LDS General Conference, held in the relatively newly renovated Salt Lake City Conference Center. Along with Visitor Center, there's the Family History Library, the Salt Lake Tabernacle, which honestly looks quite a bit like the arena that's used in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie, but I'm actually just going to ignore that entirely because we have too much to talk about already. And then most grand of all is the opulent Salt Lake City Temple. And then just a few extra large blocks away is the Utah State Capitol, which resembles the present-day U.S. Capitol in D.C., but it's definitely the shining jewel at the end of Salt Lake City's equivalent of a main street called State Street. And by extra large blocks, I mean extra large blocks. Salt Lake City has the largest city blocks in the country with an area of over 435,000 square feet. For comparison, the blocks in Manhattan are about 237,000 square feet. That is over 200,000 square feet bigger. Here in Portland, Oregon, our blocks are about 40,000. So yeah, those are some big blocks. And it's not even just the blocks, it's the streets too. At 130 feet wide, they are double the width of those in Manhattan or Portland. And it isn't just some odd coincidence that it's like this. The layout is a byproduct of the city's Mormon heritage. In 1833, a few years after starting the religion, Joseph Smith outlined how Mormon cities should look and feel. The plan drew from that era's East Coast design principles, as well as the church's desire for order. Smith called for a temple at the center of a grid and for large blocks that would enable family farming. When Mormons finally entered Utah in 1847, the church's then president, Brigham Young, applied Smith's principles to Salt Lake City's city planning. Temple Square, which is the current headquarters of the Mormon Church, is the center of the city. And while Smith's plan didn't call for wide streets, Brigham Young added them, claiming that it would allow farmers to easily turn their cattle without, quote, resorting to profanity. In the first Hunger Games book, Katniss mentions the streets of the Capitol a total of 7 times, and 3 out of those 7 times, she specifically uses the word wide to describe them. If you listen to Suzanne Collins in interviews, she has said that Katniss only notices and observes things that she thinks matter. So those streets must be pretty notable for us to know that they're so wide. Also, if you want to talk tunnels, let's talk tunnels, because Salt Lake City is notorious for its underground tunnel system. It's steeped in mystery and intrigue by the shroud of secrecy around the Mormon use of it all. But it's not all secrets, and a lot of the system is relatively well documented publicly. This photo is from the book The House of the Lord by James E. Talmage, with a caption that reads, 2 of the 3 skylights above the 90-foot-long underground passage leading from the old annex into the basement of the temple. The tunnels were once not a secret, and their use was commonly known. Today, the LDS Church prefers to not publicly mention their tunnels nor their use. Some of the tunnels are open to temple patrons. Many Mormons have walked the tunnels en route to baptisms, weddings, etc. Most describe them as wide, well-lit, ventilated, comfortably heated, carpeted, and boring. In the book Salt Lake City Underfoot, Mark Angus writes, just past the tabernacle is an entrance to the underground tunnels where LDS security offices are located, and church leaders are provided safe passage among downtown buildings. Surely the tunnels have expanded as time and construction went on. Rumors mention the tunnels to the ZCMI Center, the new Conference Center, the Genealogical Center, and the City-County Building. Utah Stories contacted the church to tour some of these tunnels, but the church maintains its silence and, quote, doesn't contribute to this story. Tunnels also emanate from the city-county building on Washington Square. The most famous is a tunnel between the city library and the city-county building. The site of the current library is where the Salt Lake Jail used to be, and the tunnel was used to transport prisoners between the buildings. According to the old-timer who showed me the tunnels, Ted Bundy was the last prisoner to walk it. And then above all else, I need you guys to understand that these buildings were made to last, okay? Recent renovations to the temple were explained in an article from the Deseret News. The seismic upgrade requires excavation to between 40 and 60 feet below ground, which is underway on the temple's north side, where a smaller town crane will be installed. Crews continue to place steel and concrete pillars called soldier piles deep underground to support a retaining wall for the work. All the underground work is intended to help fulfill President Young's bold statement in 1862 when he ordered the 16-foot-thick footings of the granite for the foundation. "I want to see the temple built in a manner that will endure through the millennium," he said, and he didn't mean the year 2000. He was referring to the 1,000 years after Christ's second coming. The goal was reiterated back in the spring of 1993 in a first presidency message written by President Gordon B. Hinckley for the 100th anniversary of the temple's dedication. "May it stand, as it was built to stand, through the millennium yet to come, and serve the needs for our Father's children, those in this life and those beyond." So all of this leads me back to the Capitol that we learn about in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Corio describes his home in the opening chapter, so this is from page 12. His front door opened onto the Corso, an avenue so wide that 8 chariots had comfortably ridden side by side on it in the old days, when the Capitol had put on displays of military pomp for the crowds. Coriolanus could remember hanging out the apartment windows as a young child, party guests bragging that they had front row seats to the parades. Then the bombers arrived, and for a long time his block was impassable. Now the streets were finally clear, rubble still laying in piles on the sidewalks, and whole buildings were as gutted as the day they'd been struck. 10 years after the victory, and he was dodging between chunks of marble and granite as he wove his way to the academy. Just there, within the first few pages, we have marble, we have granite, and we have extra wide streets. So I am convinced that at least a few of the buildings that Coriolanus talks about within Ballad as being part of the academy system on the Corso are in fact buildings that were initially built by the Mormons. Now, it does get a little bit tricky because I have examples of something that could fit the description from this little complex for every single description. The problem is that they don't always overlap with like everything being in the same building. For example, Heavensby Hall, the way that it's described, which I'm going to do it in a second, sounds a lot like it is the auditorium for the convention center, versus things that we know are in the same academy building. Other parts of it sounds like it could be the Capitol building a few blocks away. So things don't line up perfectly, but I still think it's within the realm of possibility. Renovations happen. Obviously, it's been renovated multiple times since it was initially built. So here are some more examples of those descriptions and then photos of their equivalent current day existing place in Salt Lake City. Coriolanus made his way through an entry draped in black banners, down a vaulted passage, and into the cavernous Heavensby Hall, where they would watch the broadcast of the reaping ceremony. This is from page 84. Some of the tributes drooped in their seats, chins almost on their chests, but the more defiant ones tilted their heads back and surveyed the hall. It was one of the more impressive chambers in the Capitol, and several mouths gaped open, awed by the grandeur of the marble columns, the arched windows, the vaulted ceiling. Coriolanus thought it must be a marvel to them, compared to the flat, ugly structures that were the signature style in many of the districts. The grand staircase up to the academy could hold the entire student body, so it easily accommodated the stream of officials, professors, and students. Okay, now going back to some of the things that were given in the movie, again, I say the tabernacle looks a lot like the arena that is used in the movie. However, from the text, the description of the arena sounds a lot more like a football field, and I also have a location for the football field that makes sense. So this is from page 133. The mentors piled into a few academy vans and headed for the Capitol arena, which had been built across the river to prevent crowds from swamping the downtown. In its day, the huge state-of-the-art amphitheater had been the site of many an exciting sporting, entertainment, or military event. High-profile executions of the enemy were staged there during the war, making it a target for rebel bombers. While the original structure stood, it was battered and unstable now, useful only as a venue for the Hunger Games. The lush field of meticulously tended grass had died from neglect. It was riddled with bomb craters, weeds, providing only greenery on the expanse of dirt. Rubble from the explosions, chunks of metal and stone, lay everywhere, and the 15-foot wall that encircled the field was fissured and pockmarked from the shrapnel. Each year, tributes would be locked in with nothing but an arsenal of knives, swords, maces, and the like to facilitate the bloodshed, while the audience watched from home. At the end of the games, the one who had managed to survive would be shipped back to their district, the bodies removed, the weapons collected, and the doors locked until the following year. No maintenance, no cleanup. Wind and rain might wash away the bloodstains, but Capitol hands would not. The venue is far enough away that the Capitol has to haul them over there in vans. It is stated to be on the other side of the river, so as not to clog up downtown. The river that's in Salt Lake City is closer towards the airport. It is further west of the city center that we're talking about. However, there is a creek that runs directly parallel to the Capitol building and then basically down the blocks that end up at the Temple Square, and then it kind of like disappears. So there is this creek. And so on the other side of this creek, a couple miles east, is the Rice-Eccles Stadium within the Olympic Cauldron Plaza. This is where the opening and closing ceremonies were held for the 2002 Winter Olympics. All right, we're about to switch topics here. We're gonna set away the physical geography for a moment because it only scratches the surface, and now we are going to talk about the cultural geography, and there's a lot to cover. So when I first began speaking on this link between Mormonism and the Capitol on TikTok, I got a ton of support from Mormons, ex-Mormons, and people local to the Salt Lake City area. There were quite a few people who mentioned how they always thought that the Capitol was in Salt Lake City. Some hadn't thought about it before, but in retrospect, they think it makes a ton of sense. And then I even got comments from people who were excited knowing I was in the process of making this video and offering themselves as a resource for any questions I have, which is so kind. I wasn't expecting that at all. I'm sorry I didn't take any of you up on it, but I was trying to pump this out. But it was one comment on the first video that I made about the Capitol's location that took me beyond the physical reasoning and into the cultural reasoning and down the Mormonism rabbit hole. This was their comment. It says, "Snow is also the last name of one of our early prophets. It would make sense for Corio to be a descendant of Mormon royalty." Huh? What do you mean Snow is the surname of one of your prophets? Hold on. Pause. So we all know the significance of names within the series, right? I need to make a whole video on that, but like general knowledge, names carry meaning. Suzanne Collins chooses them very deliberately, and let's be real, she does most things very deliberately, so why would Snow be any different? Throughout the series, there are plenty of examples where people's names denote their place of origin. Names that relate to their respective district industry include things like Blight, who's Joanna's district partner in Catching Fire, Glimmer and Cashmere and Gloss from the luxurious District 1. But there's also names that speak more to a character's narrative arc than it does to their place of origin. Prime example being Seneca Crane. Seneca Crane was named after Seneca the Younger, a philosopher from ancient Rome. Now, Seneca the Younger unwittingly got caught up in the aftermath of the Pisonian conspiracy, which was the plot to kill Nero, the emperor. Though historians say that it was highly unlikely Seneca actively participated in the conspiracy, he was still ultimately ordered by Nero to kill himself. I think we've heard that story before. So using that as our baseline, surely Coriolanus' name has some intentional meaning behind it. He is the big bad villain of the entire series. So something that you need to know about Mormons for this part is that they place a huge emphasis on family history and are very proud of their bloodlines. Per the church's own website, Latter-day Saints believe families can be together after this life. Therefore, it is essential to strengthen relationships with all family members, both those who are alive and those who have died. Latter-day Saints believe that the eternal joining of families is possible through sacred sealing ceremonies that take place in the temple. These temple rites may be performed by proxy for those who have died. Since 1894, the Mormon Church has dedicated time and resources to collecting and sharing records of genealogical importance. Due to cooperation from government archives, churches, and libraries, the Church has created the largest collection of family records in the world, with information on more than 3 billion deceased people. This effort was originally facilitated through the Genealogical Society of Utah and now through Family Search, a nonprofit organization sponsored by the church. If you have done any genealogical research at all before, you have definitely used Family Search, and all of those records are there thanks to the Mormons. So, thank you, Mormons. So Coriolanus is obviously very proud of his family's legacy and history. He has been brought up to be proud of it, very specifically by Grandmam. And we have examples of this throughout the text. Coriolanus had been in a state of denial about the taxes, but now the reality of his family's displacement hit him like a truck. How could he say goodbye to the only home he'd ever known? To his mother, to his childhood, to those sweet memories of his life before the war. Those 4 walls not only kept his family safe from the world, they protected the legend of Snow's wealth. He would be losing his residence, his history, and his identity in one fell swoop. And we have another example as he's about to be shipped off to District 12. Tigress says, "Remember, Coriolanus, that wherever you go, you will always be a Snow. No one can ever take that from you." He wondered if that wasn't the problem, the impossibility of being a Snow in this post-war world, what it had driven him to do. But he only said, "I'll try one day to be worthy of it." But I promised you a quick little biography of one of Coriolanus' ancestors. So, enter Lorenzo Snow. Since the establishment of the LDS Church in 1830, there have been 17 men who have served as president. Mormons consider each of these men to be prophets who received revelations from God, which, don't get me started on the political implications of that, because we're going to go into it more later. But anyways, Lorenzo Snow was the 5th president of the church, and before that, he held a few different offices within the church hierarchy. He was also a politician, elected to and eventually becoming the president of the Utah Territorial Council. As a sidebar, he did have a pretty high-profile legal case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court regarding his practice of polygamy. The man had 9 wives and 42 children. 42 children. That's almost enough for the Second Quarter Quell. A few, but not all of his convictions were eventually overturned, and then President Grover Cleveland actually pardoned him. So that's just a fun little nugget. So early on in his career, he was called to serve on something called the Quorum of 12 and eventually became the Quorum's president. I'm going to quote Wiki here because I'm going to be honest, my grasp is still a little bit slippery on what it is exactly that they do. There's a lot of very similar names and titles, but basically they have a lot of power. So, quote, "The group normally has a leadership role in the church that is second only to the church's first presidency. The quorum implicitly follows the first presidency's policies and pronouncements, and its members are chosen by the first presidency. However, when the first presidency is dissolved, which occurs upon the death of the president of the church, the quorum of the 12 apostles becomes the church's governing body, led by the president of the quorum, until they ordain a new president of the church, and he chooses his counselors, which completes the reorganization of the first presidency. Membership in the quorum is a lifelong calling." So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I think they're second in command. I got really confused about the difference between the first presidency and the president of the church, because I thought it was the same thing, but then they kind of talk about it like it's different. So I don't know. The point is, Snow was there. But the crazy part is that one of the first things that he did was to reorganize the first presidency almost immediately after he took office, rather than waiting years like his predecessors had. So Snow inherited his presidency as the church was facing severe financial difficulties. He worked on fixing these problems with two strategies, and they might sound a little bit familiar. The first one was by issuing short-term bonds that totaled over $1 million. But the big one was his long game plan, which is he was the first person to emphatically encourage the concept of tithing as an expected contribution from church members. So in layman's terms, they were basically like, hey, if you don't give us 10% of your income, are you even with us? Do you even rock with us? Do you even know that guy up there? Yeah, there are implications. But the tithing thing is obviously very successful, and the church was fully out of debt less than 10 years later. And they have still been collecting tithing ever since. So do with that what you will. So this comes from page 104 as Snow is writing up his proposal to change up the games. Reflecting on the classroom discussion with Dr. Gall and the electricity in the audience when they'd fed the starving tributes at the zoo, he focused on the food. For the first time, sponsors would be able to buy items, a piece of bread, a chunk of cheese, to be delivered by drones to a specific tribute. A panel would be established to review the nature and value of each item. A sponsor would have to be a capital citizen in good standing who was not directly related to the games. This ruled out game makers, mentors, peacekeepers assigned to guard the tributes, and any of the aforementioned parties' immediate family members. When it came to his idea of the betting, he suggested a second panel to create a venue that would allow capital citizens to officially wager on the victor, establish the odds, and oversee those payments to the winners. Proceeds from either program would be funneled towards the cost of the games, making them essentially free. And I'm going to be honest, I think the money went to more than just the games. But the immediate success of their early changes that they implemented in those structures is actually not the only place that we can draw parallels between the two, because they both spent their final days rearranging the line of presidential succession. About a year before Lorenzo Snow died, he worked with other church leaders to change the existing hierarchy. The person meant to inherit his position was someone many of the general authorities felt would be a disaster for the church. They put together a proposal that changed the person in line of succession from the one who had been an ordained apostle the longest to the one who had been on the quorum the longest, effectively cutting his would-be successor out of the equation entirely, as he'd never been one of the 12. On April 5th of 1900, the first presidency and the quorum unanimously approved the new policy. Imagine being so bad at your job that they completely change the laws of government and succession because they don't want you to have it. Embarrassing. Had Snow not had the conversation that he had with Katniss in the greenhouse, Coin would have instituted herself as president, and the cycle would have started over again. In an odd way, Snow's final act was a strange sort of kindness, but only because it brought his own satisfaction. He gave Katniss the tools that she needed to put the pieces together and end it all, but Katniss was never his true enemy. His true enemy was the threat to his own power, which, for a time, that was Katniss, but at this point was Coin. Once he had accepted his loss, he realized that he could still win by making sure that Coin's would-be empire never rose and that it fell with him. I always found the scene in the movies where Katniss shoots Coin instead of Snow and he starts laughing very reminiscent of the scene that is not in the movies but is in the books, where Foxface discovers that the food has been blown up and starts hysterically laughing. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And just to really drive home the point of the two's similarity, Lorenzo Snow is also credited with succinctly summarizing the Mormon doctrine of exaltation and eternal progression in his often repeated couplet, quote, "As man now is, God once was. as God now is, man may be. In this context, it's really giving the whole world is an arena and I'm the victor.
I used to think that the Hunger Games were punishment for the districts. Then I thought they served as a warning to us here in the capital. Now I know the whole world is an arena, and we need the Hunger Games to remind us all who we truly are.
And who are you, do you determine?
The victor.
Okay, at this point, we're going to sort of switch gears again and talk about the theoretical future in which the descendants of Mormons become the ruling class. How did they get that way? While the established hierarchy within the religion isn't the only reason that I could see it going that way, it is certainly one of them. That, combined with some of the core tenets of the belief system, creates an organized population primed for cooperative longevity, which is something that most other people don't have, or if they do, it's just not to the scale of the Mormon Church. Mormonism is a high-control religious environment to exist within, and children are conditioned from birth to stay within their rightful place in the hierarchy, not to question the actions or the words of those above you. And I mean this as no offense if you're Mormon. Like, I am not here to give commentary on what's real, what's not, but a lot of the traditions and ceremonies that take place within the temple are strange enough to the general public that they would not be so easily accepted by members without the social and hierarchical conditioning leading up to it. Strong foundational family relationships are one of the core values of their beliefs, to the degree that they have literally made family time a weekly holiday. Family home evening is held one night per week, usually Monday, and families are encouraged to spend time together in religious instruction, prayer, and other activities. According to the LDS Church, the purpose of family home evening is to help families strengthen bonds of love with each other, as well as provide an atmosphere where parents can teach their children principles of the gospel. Family home evening includes a game or fun activity, treats, and a short lesson. The responsibilities for each are often rotated among family members so that even the youngest may be assisted in presenting a short lesson or devotional on a given topic. Family business for the week may be addressed and the family schedule also reviewed. And they've got you covered if you're single, because in places with a high density of single adult members of the LDS Church, local wards or stakes may organize home evening groups. The purpose of these meetings is the same as that of the family-based home evenings, but groups are composed of peers rather than family members. Home evening groups are most common near colleges and universities, including but not limited to LDS universities such as Brigham Young University in Provo. As a sidebar, I am a huge Dancing with the Stars fan. I have been for like 15 years at this point. This does make me wonder, was this a factor that was considered when Dancing with the Stars moved from Monday to Tuesday nights? I'm sure most of it was for network reasons, it was out of their control. But I would be surprised if this wasn't at least a consideration during that conversation, given that about half of the professional dancers on that show are all from the same studio in Utah. Also, huge asterisks here for the pro-family values, because while I'm sure that many individual Mormon families are genuinely wonderful and they love each other unconditionally, that is certainly not the structural expectation per the church. A lot of people have been shunned, abused, or otherwise mistreated by those who are supposed to love them for a lot of stupid reasons, in my opinion, like being gay or having premarital sex. Of course, this is the case with all Abrahamic religions. Physical and emotional abuse can and is perpetrated by almost anyone, almost anywhere, but I'm pointing it out here specifically because we're talking about Mormonism. I'm not saying Mormons are the only ones who do this, rather, we are talking about Mormons and they also do this sometimes. And I would argue that this aspect is also something that you can observe in the text through the schism of Tigris and Snow's relationship towards the end of Ballad, and then comparing that to when we meet Tigris again in Mockingjay, and she is fully on board to help the rebels to kill her cousin. So just like many evangelical communities, there is a strong emphasis on apocalyptic narratives. But unlike most of those evangelical communities that have the same emphasis, the Mormons are actually structurally prepared to take the apocalypse head on. They aren't called the Latter-day Saints for nothing, right? It's literally in the names. They are prepared for the end of days. And this link is strong enough. There is an entire Wikipedia page about it. You can look it up. It's called Mormons in the Apocalypse. So from that page, Mormons are well known for storing food and emergency supplies. Latter-day Saint leaders have instructed their members to prepare themselves such that they could survive without government aid. In studying the scriptures, members believe the earth will suffer famines like those that occurred in ancient times. They also believe imminent natural disasters will take place in the last days, leaving them without access to basic necessities. It has been recommended that members store up to 1 year of food, water, and other supplies. Members often dedicate a room in their home for storing extra food and emergency supplies. There are also specific companies in Utah and Idaho that are dedicated to providing food storage supplies for purchase. Now, I have to say, good for the Mormons, okay? Because I got into some weird arguments on TikTok when I was telling people that they should have an emergency kit. I got called a prepper and a conspiracy theorist. Meanwhile, I'm like, half of this is just my backpacking supplies. All I'm saying here is like, have a first aid kit and water and shelf-stable food and maybe a little camp stove and a weather radio. That's literally all I said. You would have thought I was losing my mind from the way people responded to it. So there are plenty of apocalyptic prophecies that do take place within the religious canon of Mormonism, but the one that I'm going to talk about is not one of them. Okay, it's called the White Horse Prophecy, and to be clear, this prophecy specifically is highly contested and not considered accurate to church doctrine by most Mormons. That said, we're talking in theoreticals here, so there's one specific piece of it that I think makes it a really interesting thing to add to this conversation regarding the present-day Mormons eventually becoming the future of the capital. So the White Horse Prophecy was shared by Edwin Rushton in 1900, but supposedly made back in 1843 by Joseph Smith. And the prophecy is as follows. The Latter-day Saints would go to the Rocky Mountains and be a great and mighty people. The U.S. Constitution will one day hang like a thread, but be saved by church members and by the efforts of the White Horse. The White Horse in question is referring to one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So basically, the prophecy is saying that one day the United States will be a Mormon theocracy. A theodemocracy is a theoretical political system proposed by none other than Joseph Smith. He defines a theodemocracy as a fusion of traditional democratic republican principles under the U.S. Constitution with theocratic rule. He first coined the term theodemocracy when he was running for president. By the way, Joseph Smith ran for president in 1844, and he was killed during his campaign. Okay, getting that out of the way. It's unclear whether or not he believed he could or should form his theocratic government before the soon-to-be Second Coming and the destruction of worldly political systems. But either way, he did teach that what was considered to be the kingdom of God would hold dominion in the last days over all other kingdoms, as foretold in the book of Daniel. There is a quote from him in May of 1844 that he, quote, calculates to be one of the instruments of setting up the kingdom of Daniel by the word of the Lord, and intends to lay a foundation that will revolutionize the world. It will not be by sword or guns that this kingdom will roll on. The power of truth is such that all nations will be under the necessity of obeying the gospel. Make no mistake, Panem, as it stands, is absolutely a theocracy. It's just a theocracy where Snow is God and Thomas Hobbes' The Leviathan is the gospel. So if you don't know what Leviathan is, it was written by Thomas Hobbes in the 1600s and is essentially meant to be political and philosophical theory about the nature of man. The most famous quote from that text, what Hobbes describes as the state of nature, is essentially the conclusion that Gaul leads Snow to by the end of the book, that without government to control them and keep them in line, humans are violent and vicious without exception. So, to quote the text, in such condition, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth. no navigation nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing, such as things require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. I'm sure the guy was great at parties. So next we're going to talk about Panem as it exists in the series as the fully realized state of Deseret. And if you don't know what that is, it's okay, I didn't either. Remember how I said I learned a lot of stuff? So Mormonism specifically is inherently based in the Americas, just like the Hunger Games series. The story is inextricably linked to North American geography, history, and culture. Mormon theology teaches that the United States is a unique place and that Mormons are God's chosen people, selected for a singular destiny. The Book of Mormon alludes to the United States as being the new biblical promised land, with the Constitution of the U.S. being divinely inspired, and argues that America is an exceptional nation where the holy city of New Jerusalem will be built for the second coming. And that's not the only way that Mormonism is inherently tied to North America. There is also, including but not limited to, the fact that the Garden of Eden was supposedly in Missouri. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but I'm not here to judge. So the state of Deseret was a proposed U.S. state promoted by leaders of the LDS Church who had already founded settlements in what is present-day Utah. A provisional state government was operating for nearly 2 years, from 1849 to 1850, but it was never officially recognized by the U.S. government. The land included in the original proposal was incredibly strategic in an effort to step on as few toes as possible and increase the likelihood that the state would be accepted. So here is a map of the originally proposed territory, and the reasoning behind where these borders are is as follows. At the time of its proposal, the existing population of the Deseret area, including Southern California, was sparse, since most of the California settlement had been in Northern California gold rush areas of 1848 to 1849 around San Francisco Bay and Sacramento. Likewise, the border with New Mexico did not reach the Rio Grande in order to avoid becoming entangled in the existing disputes of western and northwestern borders of Texas, after the old expansive Republic of Texas was admitted as the 28th state in 1846. The Deseret state also avoided encroaching on the fertile Willamette Valley further north in western Oregon, which had been heavily traveled and settled by legions of wagon trains since the 1840s with the famous Oregon Trail. Because this proposal encompassed lands that were largely considered inhospitable for farming or cultivation, they hoped that they would avoid conflict over the issue of the expansion of slavery, which was a hot-button topic at the time. While Mormon scripture spoke against slavery, both Joseph Smith and Brigham Young made it very clear that Mormons were not abolitionists. Joseph Smith even went so far as to publish a piece in 1836 stating that slavery was, quote, God's will.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
He said that Northerners had no right to tell Southerners whether they could enslave individuals, and that if slavery were evil, Southern men of piety would have objected. Which is, no, man. He expressed concern that freed former slaves would overrun the United States and violate chastity and virtue. He pointed to biblical stories of slavery, arguing that the prophets who enslaved people were inspired by God and knew more than the abolitionists, which is actually insane when you remember that the guy saying this literally wrote the book. But he was saying all of this in the 1830s when the Mormons were still based out of Missouri, where slavery was legal. He changed his tune during his presidential campaign in 1844 when the Mormons were largely based out of Illinois, where slavery wasn't legal. And he actually went so far as to start campaigning with the idea that he would immediately abolish slavery upon being elected. So, when he was killed during this campaign, there was a schism between the church, and people sort of went in two directions. So a small group that later became the Community of Christ upheld these more recent abolitionist beliefs, while the Latter-day Saints, who went with Brigham Young to Utah Territory, embraced slavery again, and they were like, it's God's will. And then Brigham Young went so far as to be the person that helped institute slavery in the Utah Territory. So, not great, not awesome, don't love that. Colonization. The point that I want you to take away from this part is the enduring narrative of being chosen people who are destined to lead per God's will. Young people born within the church are even referred to as youth of noble birthright. Compare that sentiment to this quote taken from the first chapter of Ballad on page 16 to 17. Sejanus' father was a District 2 manufacturer who had sided with the president. He had made such a fortune off of munitions that he'd been able to buy his family's way into a life in the capital. The Plinths now enjoyed the privileges that the oldest, most powerful families had earned over generations. It was unprecedented that Sejanus, a district-born boy, was a student at the academy, but his father's lavish donation had allowed for much of the school's post-war reconstruction. A capital-born citizen would have expected a building to be renamed for them. Sejanus' father had only requested an education to his son. For Coriolanus, the Plinths and their kind were a threat to all he held dear. The newly rich climbers in the capital were chipping away at the old order simply by virtue of their presence. So, yeah, he's like, I should be in charge. What's with these guys? Oh no, they're getting rights. But what really ties all of this together is the concept of blood atonement. So blood atonement was a practice in the history of Mormonism, still adhered to by some fundamentalist splinter groups, where Jesus' sacrifice was not considered enough to cover the worst sins. To atone for those sins, the sinner should be killed in a way that allows his blood to be shed upon the ground as a sacrificial offering. The doctrine arose among early Mormon leaders, and it was heavily promoted during the Mormon Reformation, when Brigham Young governed Utah Territory as a near theocracy. In Young's view, in a full Mormon theocracy, the practice would be implemented by the state as a penal measure. The blood atonement doctrine was the inspiration that led to laws that allowed capital punishment to be administered by firing squad, by the noose, or by decapitation in both the territory and the state of Utah. In 1850, people sentenced to death could choose between being hanged or the firing squad, and in 1851 is when they added the beheading as a third option. There was not a single person who chose to go out that way. Nobody was beheaded by the state of Utah as their capital punishment. So in 1888, it was taken off the books. And I mean, are we surprised? Who would ever choose such a violent and bloody means of death when you could just be hanged? I'm sorry, that's how I would do it. I don't want to be shot either. Are you coming to the tree? You guys can see the patterns, right? You can see how these type of deeply held cultural and religious beliefs could have evolved into the structure of government that we see in Panem. So the Apostle Bruce R. McConkie, speaking on behalf of LDS church leadership, wrote in 1978 that while he still believed that certain sins are beyond the atoning power of the blood of Christ, the doctrine of blood atonement is only applicable to a theocracy, which the state of Utah is not. Nevertheless, given its long history, up until at least 1994, potential jurors in Utah were questioned on their beliefs regarding blood atonement before they were assigned to trials where the death penalty might have been considered.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sheldon Cooper, and welcome to the premiere episode of Sheldon Cooper Presents Fun with Flags.
Okay, this section might seem like a tangent, but stick with me because I promise you it's not, and your jaw is going to be on the floor just like mine was. I have always been interested in flags and flag design, and specifically the movie canon's interpretation of Panem's flag. I do appreciate, number one, it's very sensible use of a bicolor design. We got gold, we got red. Reasonable, okay. And number two, I also really like just how much resemblance it has to the present-day seal of the United States. So both of these flags include the eagle imagery with the bird clutching a collection of arrows in its talon and the inclusion of a plant of some kind. But for the seal of the USA, the eagle holds the arrows in one foot and an olive branch in the other, acknowledging the power in both war and peace. The bird looks towards the olive branch, signaling the desire to pursue peace when possible. And I'm not just making this up, by the way. I am reading this directly from the government diplomacy website. So then above it, there is a constellation of 13 stars representing the original 13 colonies. Can you guys see the vision now? Because I'm going to be so real with you. It's so obvious that I missed it for years. That the story is literally about 13 districts rebelling and overthrowing a corrupt government system in the pursuit of democracy. It's so obvious I missed it. I only noticed like a year ago. So if this is the first time you were putting two and two together, zero judgment from me. So compare the seal to the flag that is used in the original 4 movies, where the eagle clutches only the arrows and the olive branch is omitted entirely. In its place, the eagle is encircled by wheat, signifying the cultural significance of food and the power that it holds, the way that it determines wars. The original flag is particularly interesting in the expanded context of Ballad, which has a slightly different flag. It has the same eagle design, but instead of wheat, it's circled by 12 stars, representing 12 districts. This implies that the flag design was changed after the Hunger Games were reformed by Snow's vision. But when the illustrated edition of the Hunger Games came out a couple of months ago, I decided I liked this flag design even more. And maybe I can show you on camera. I'll insert a clip. So just like in the flag of the movie, the 12 districts are represented by small figures around a central object, but in this case, in the illustrated edition, those objects are centered around a star. When I first saw it, I liked it for 2 reasons. Number 1, again, the lack of complex elements made the central figure more apparent as representing the capital and the capital alone. They are the center of their own universe around which all the other districts are forced to resolve. And then number 2, I liked it because it visually reminded me of the original Betsy Ross flag. Again, the divergence emphasized the self-importance of the capital, but it also evoked visual cues that point towards the 13 colonies, 13 districts connection. But then, here's the tea, because as I was doing research for this video, I happened upon the flag that was used by the provisional government of the state of Deseret. Do you want to guess what that flag looks like? Because I just about fell out of my chair. Yeah. I don't feel like I need to say anything. You guys get it. All right, we have made it to the final big section where we're going to start applying all of this context to the evolved behaviors and sensibilities of the people of Panem's capital. But before I do that, I need to make it so clear to you guys, okay? Panem is a post-religious North America. I am not on any level saying that the capital citizens are Mormon, okay? They most certainly are not. Rather, this has been an exploration of how the cultural and physical remnants of Mormon culture and influence have survived and developed into other things over time. So now we're going to apply all this context and analyze capital behaviors. While there is a smattering of folk traditions that still exist throughout the districts, they don't seem to be linked to any type of deity, only steeped in ritual. And ritual is simply a part of human existence. If we don't have religion, we find ritual in other ways. So we do know about some marriage rituals from districts 4 and 12, and we know about funerary rites from District 2 thanks to Ballad. But neither of these things necessitate any type of worship or belief, only respect and appreciation for the other person. And then the only 2 official countrywide holidays that we know about are Reaping Day on July 4th. Excellent detail, by the way, Suzanne. Thank you for revealing that one in Ballad. And then New Year's is their official winter holiday that they celebrate. And neither of those things have any type of religious affiliation. Within the capital, any and all types of spiritual and ritual beliefs have not only disappeared, but they're also now subject to mockery. On page 224, when Sejanus has just been discovered in the arena, "That's your son in there? What's he doing?" asked the grand man, aghast. "He's putting breadcrumbs on the body," said Ma, "so Marcus has food on his journey." His journey where? Asked Grandman. He's dead. Back to wherever he came from, said Ma. It's what we do back home when someone dies. Coriolanus couldn't help feeling embarrassed for her. If you ever need proof of the district's backwardsness, there you had it. Primitive people with primitive customs. How much bread had they wasted with this nonsense? Oh no, he starved to death. Somebody get the bread. He had a sinking feeling that his supposed friendship was going to come back and haunt him. As if on cue, the phone rang. So, clearly, Snow thinks you're an idiot, stupid dumbass if you believe in literally anything at all. So, like I said, I've been talking about this on TikTok a little bit, and somebody asked me in a comment, how do I think that Mormons, of all people, lost their faith to end up as staunchly anti-religious as they are? And to that I say, what else is there to do? Like, when your beliefs are steeped so deeply in the idea that the apocalypse is coming, but that you don't need to be scared because God's going to save you, and then God never comes to save you? I don't know, I'd lose my religion too. But again, the key point here is that they never lost the hierarchy or the religious structure, only the belief in a deity. Snow very much still subscribes to a set of beliefs about how humans should act, what they owe to a higher being, in this case himself, and how they should atone for their sins. And what is that, if not, essentially, still religion, in which God walks on earth and is the president? So, capital accents. This is a funny one, because I like how it's done in the movies, okay? I like the accents that the actors use.
It's the marmalade.
That is mahogany!
But I also like how Tatiana Mansali does the accents in the audiobooks even better.
I hear Effie Trinket's voice calling me to rise. Up, up, up! It's going to be a big, big, big day!
They're described as silly and funny within the first few pages of the book, but the best description comes when Katniss is preparing to meet Cinna, and her prep team is doing stuff with her. So this is from page 61 in the first book. I grit my teeth as Venia, a woman with aqua hair and gold tattoos above her eyebrows, yanks a strip of fabric from my leg, tearing out the hair beneath it. Sorry, she pipes in her silly capital accent. You're just so hairy. Why do these people speak in such a high pitch? Why do their jaws barely open when they talk? Why do the ends of their sentences go up as if they're asking a question? Odd vowels, clipped words, and always a hiss on the letter S. No wonder it's impossible not to mimic them. Have you guys ever heard a Utah accent? Specifically, have you ever heard a Mormon Utah accent?
What are some of the Utah-isms that you've seen? Anything in particular?
Utah-isms?
Yeah, when we just say stuff different, like praise the Lord.
So I found this study by BYU graduate Joshua Stevenson, who was studying linguistics, and he did a test to see if people could reliably distinguish the perceived linguistic phenomenon of what he referred to as missionary voice. So in his paper, he explains that this kind of linguistic research falls under the sociolinguistics subdiscipline of perceptual dialectology, which is also sometimes considered a branch of folk linguistics. That is, the study of how non-linguists perceive and process variation in language. Although listeners' judgments don't always correspond with scientific linguistic realities, an underlying assumption of perceptual dialectology is that folk beliefs about language matter. The inclusion of folk beliefs in linguistic studies can offer important insights into the realities of language variation and change. So even though his study ended without showing any type of statistical significance, the patterns can very much still be observed with the qualitative responses that he got. Many participants referred to a rehearsed quality in missionary speech, sometimes using terms like storytelling or planned to describe it. They have a more rehearsed quality. Also, the positivity feels a bit forced, wrote one survey respondent.
Hello! Oh, there she is. My greatest triumph.
Others noted that missionaries tended to repeat words randomly, generally spoke at a slower rate, and paused more frequently.
Oh, dear. He's a fashion star. You're his muse. Everyone in the Capitol's wearing him. Everyone.
Still, another respondent singled out sister missionaries, noting their enthusiasm and smiling voice. For women, there was a specific cadence that made it sound like they were intentionally smiling and trying to be peppy.
Smile, 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 smile. Stand up straight. You're on camera.
Continuing on this thread of perceived gender differences, 2 other study participants observed respectively that sisters seem to have it worse, and I feel like sister missionaries also get this accent where they move their mouths differently. There were 9 specific mentions of the word intonation, as well as many other responses that touched on the same concept without including the term. For example, respondents noticed that missionaries end each phrase with a high pitch instead of a usual lower pitch, speak with rising intonations, slightly adopt the rising tone of questions, sometimes go up in pitch at the end of their sentences and phrases like they are asking a question. But honestly, you don't really need a scientific study to know that this is an observable phenomenon among many different socioeconomic and cultural groups. A lot of people have different accents that are unique to their own little group. Again, most Americans can identify over the phone if they are talking to a Black American. People can identify gay voice. I can't imagine a world where such a distinct and virtually contained cultural group not have a specific sound to them.
But we always have to ask, why do people speak differently from one another? And what we understand is that having group differences makes us who we are. If we're proud to be from Utah, sounding like they're from Utah is a very powerful way of telling other people that you're proud of your identity.
Of course, there's a Mormon voice, and the internet agrees. I'm just going to throw up some of my favorite comments I've seen on Reddit while I was looking stuff up. Are you referring to the unusual sing-song dialect? If so, it's actually a regional dialect out west, and I think it stems from Swedish. This is terrible, but think about the Muffet, the Swedish chef, same cadence.
English beer, the Swedish meatball. It's beer, the sauce, the meatball.
I first noticed the Mormon accent on my mission. When missionaries started teaching, they adopted a sing-songy voice where every sentence seemed to end as a question. The inflection at the end of the sentence would turn up. That, coupled with the rote phrases, felt like there was a Mormon accent. It's not as common in normal conversation, but once a person starts to give a talk or share their testimony, it starts to become more apparent.
Hello? Hi, Sister Kick. This is Sister Jansen. Do you have a minute?
Oh, hi, Sister Jansen. Of course I have a minute.
And then these last 2 I actually got from some forum group specifically for ex-Mormons. They both cracked me up. Shame and denial is what I'm hearing in some of these replies. Mormons do have an accent. It's similar to the Midwestern or Southern drawl, but it's much more sing-song and self-conscious. I think it expresses the Mormon personality of saying, I am humble and above the fray. I am a shining example to draw in others and make them admire me. It comes off as a bit passive-aggressive to outsiders with a faster, more clipped speech. Mormons need not feel embarrassed by their speech patterns, which reflect their culture and their pride in who they are. In my opinion, the most telling element of the Utah accent, which can also be heard in large parts of Idaho, Arizona, Wyoming, and Nevada, is the shift of the long A, as in tail, to short E, as in tail. Beyond actual pronunciation, what stands out to me when I hear people from Utah is their inflection. I have a hard time listening to the sing-songy, half-whispered, bear my testimony voice with its overemphasized S's and reliance on cliches like tender mercies.
Take it all in. This is sacred ground. History was made here.
So yeah, I feel like we can safely say the accent stuck around. While I can't personally comment on the food in Salt Lake City or how it might evolve, I have seen interest being spread over the Mormons' one permissible vice and the only place they can get caffeine, which is soda. So they're forbidden from drinking tea and coffee, and it has something to do with the fact that they're hot drinks. Not that it has caffeine, but they also can't have them iced. So I don't really know the official rules, but they can't do drugs or smoke or do really anything that the rest of us turn to when we need something to help us stay sane. So they really took soda and ran with it into a very unique, dry drink culture. Now listen, I am not personally a soda person. It feels slimy to me. I don't like the syrup. So while I am not personally interested in trying the infamous dirty soda, I'm also not here to yuck somebody's yum. You guys love it. That's great. I love that for you. That said, a lot of people are here to do that.
Can I do a 32-ounce Texas tab? Utah is like land of the Mormon bar, which are all the soda shops that we have. There's one on every corner. We don't drink alcohol or do drugs, and so it's kind of our vice.
In an article that I found interesting, but also mildly amusing, even though it was definitely not meant to be amusing. It's just because it's a very defensive article, I feel. Anyways, it was published in Michigan Daily, and it reads, "Until the advent of short-form video sharing on social media, the Mormon corridor remained relatively low profile. The Mormon corridor's anonymity, however, was broken when dirty soda, a mix of Diet Coke, half and half, coconut syrup, and lime, took TikTok by storm. Residents of the Mormon corridor began sharing their favorite soda variations, and the topic began trending. Dirty soda shops, such as Thirst and Swig, began heavily promoting the drink in conjunction with users' at-home soda recipes, which garnered shock, revulsion, and disgust from people around the world. Soda is already super sweet. I can't imagine adding syrup, reads one comment, whose sentiment is echoed by almost 2,000 likes. It's not gross. Yeah, okay, chimes in another user. However, the flurry of angry TikTok comments and blog posts criticizing dirty sodas is more than just a response to breaking culinary norms. For those outside the Mormon community, dirty soda hatred has become a conduit for critiquing the Church of Latter-day Saints. By altering the fundamental nature of something so universal as soda, the restored gospel of Jesus Christ asserts itself beyond the narrow social and geographic boundary in which it has operated for centuries. Dirty soda directly reflects Mormon values insofar as they act as an alternative to the status quo and represent the restored gospel's distinct to Scripture. A uniquely Mormon coffee and tea band inspired the unique drink, which changes how soda is conventionally consumed, just as the restored gospel itself acts as an alternative reshaping of mainstream Christianity. The proliferation of Utah's soda shops is accompanied by a spread of Mormon culture formerly contained within a thin strip of Western land. Internet users revile dirty soda for many of the same reasons they critique the tenets of the restored gospel. A quick glance at the comment section on a soda-themed TikTok reveals that most users are criticizing the soda's taste and appearance as a means of criticizing Mormon culture itself. Chiefly, comments accuse Mormons of being out of touch, unhealthy, and guilty of perpetrating outdated values. That was a mouthful. So I do believe that this article brings up a really interesting perspective, though, and one that ties in well with Katniss's view of the Capitol. Because as much as Katniss does genuinely enjoy the culinary experiences that she's afforded in the Capitol, she also can't separate their consumption habits from their wider impact. She can't deny that it's delicious, because it is, but she also can't deny that it's excessive, because it is. There's a whole section in the first book where she mentally parses out just how much work it would take for her to make a dupe of the meal that's in front of her, and how unaware people are of that labor. So this is from page 64. Sinnott invites me to sit on one of the couches and takes his place across from me. He presses a button on the side of the table. The top splits, and from below rises a second tabletop that holds our lunch. Chicken and chunks of oranges cooked in a creamy sauce laid on a bed of pearly white grain. Tiny green peas and onions, rolls shaped like flowers, and for dessert, a pudding the color of honey. I try to imagine assembling this meal by myself back home. Chickens are too expensive, but I can make do with a wild turkey. I need to shoot a second turkey to trade for an orange. Goat's milk would have to substitute for cream. We can grow peas in the garden, but I'd have to get wild onions from the woods. I don't recognize the grain. Our own Deseret rations cooks down to an unattractive brown mush. Fancy rolls would mean another trade with the baker, perhaps for 2 or 3 squirrels. As for the pudding, I can't even guess what's in it. Days of hunting and gathering for this one meal, and even then it would be a poor substitute for the Capitol version. Excuse me. So Mormons turn to their dirty sodas for a caffeine fix because their sacred texts deny them coffee and tea. People in the Capitol take an elixir that allows them to vomit so they can keep eating because their cultural beliefs teach them that they are deserving of and entitled to those delicacies. When you're coming at it from the Capitol citizens' perspective and you take away all of this extra context that we have and you think about their very limited worldview, they believe that it would be wasteful for them not to enjoy the spread to the full extent. And to be fair, if they didn't, if that food went to waste and nobody ate it, do you really think that it would be given to somebody who needs it? Because I don't. And I do think that maybe they're not as like quite as far off base as our gut reactions are, because obviously, yeah, they're off base. Okay, there is no need to have that much excess when other people in the districts are starving, but their individual actions aren't really making an impact on that. But my point with this is that Salt Lake City already has what outsiders, people who are not from there, would consider a bit of an over-the-top drink culture, so I don't really see why that would change or why it wouldn't then extend into food over hundreds of years. To have been used to having these privileges and wealth and resources, to then going without them and really, really struggling for those years, to then getting your abundance back after the war has been won by the Capitol. That's how you get a really crazy food culture. Because sure, I'm sure that they had good food before the rebellion, but after they were without for so long, I bet that food was crazy good. We know it's crazy good. Katniss tells us it is. And then our final little piece here is going to be fashion and body modification. I actually think that the fashion within the Capitol is probably the most well-known aspect of the series for anybody who hasn't read or watched it. Even if they don't know the premise, they probably know some of the outfits. At least Effie's butterfly dress from Catching Fire. Iconic. Love that dress. But it's interesting because Mormon doctrines do have an emphasis on presenting as your best selves and the value of keeping up appearances. So Brigham Young, the second president of the LDS Church, instructed his followers to beautify your gardens, your houses, your farms, beautify the city. This will make us happy and produce plenty. The direction was an early example of an animating Mormon sentiment that still plays out today. Outward appearances matter. Your dress and grooming will influence the way you and others act, reads For the Strength of Youth, a widely distributed Mormon pamphlet. Tattoos are discouraged, as are multiple piercings. The LDS Church website has an entire section devoted to grooming and dress, complete with makeup tutorials. You are not required to wear makeup, however, wearing makeup can help you look your best, it reads. To minimize the appearance of dark circles under your eyes, use a yellow or pink toned concealer lighter than your skin tone. Use your fingers to gently apply and blend the color under your eyes along the lash line. Having church-sanctioned makeup tutorials on their own website is actually wild. Like, even with the religious aspects of these teachings diminished, it's really easy to see how the sentiments morphed into the self-expression obsessed trend-seeking population that is highly concerned with presentation. Again, all it's really doing is taking God out of it. Then there's the popularity of body modification within the Capitol to the point that it's basically ubiquitous. Something else that I accidentally stumbled on in my research for this video is Utah's crazy billboard culture. So many of them have cosmetic surgery ads or other like beauty services, and some of them are really unhinged. One ad for a day spa says, "We heart soaking too," which is crazy. And then another one says, "God's remodeling his temple. Isn't it time to remodel yours?" Wild. So according to two people from BYU, about 14% of LDS members have had major cosmetic surgery, including breast augmentations, tummy tucks, and liposuction, and 20% have undergone cosmetic enhancements, such as laser hair removal, Botox injections, or skin procedures. The national average is less than 4%. 14 and 20% compared to 4%? An article from the Salt Lake Tribune writes, Coyne and Barnes discovered a subtle religious impulse in an individual's decisions to enhance their bodies, the need for perfection. Respondents who were most likely to have cosmetic surgery were those who were wealthy, since such procedures can be costly, and those who had the highest religious salience. These individuals were highly religious. However, they may erroneously believe that religion is tied to perfection in a variety of ways, including physical appearance or finances, and they may attempt to conform to what is referred to as the thin ideal in the United States culture. For them, appearing to be a perfect, worthy, righteous member of the church means looking the part as well. It might be what some call Utah's perfection culture, that quietly whispers, "You aren't good enough the way you are." Another article, this one from the Daily Utah Chronicle, expands on this idea. Ironically, Mormon doctrine says the body is a temple and that it doesn't need to change. But Utah's culture tells a different story, and so does the state's plastic surgery rates. There is a specific tie in Utah culture that is not said but felt. The way that you appear on the outside is a reflection of how your soul is doing. According to Conley, a reason for that could be traced back to Mormon culture's desire to assimilate in the 1950s. As Mormons assimilate and they're converted to the American dream and all that jazz, it's no longer building a community that's like heaven. It's making your home like heaven. And wouldn't a goddess have a small waist and big boobs? In this society, yes. Pregnancy is another factor in Mormon culture that may be influencing plastic surgery rates. Mormon women are taught from a young age that their purpose is to have children. Mormons have more children than any other U.S. religious group. Because of the cultural emphasis on childbearing, many young women have children at a young age before they themselves are really grown up. Commonly, these women aren't having 1 or 2 children, but 3 or 4 in quick succession. Multiple pregnancies in a short period of time affect the body, leaving breasts saggy and stomachs that aren't flat. This leads to what a lot of people in the plastic surgery industry refer to as mommy makeovers. And because there are so many Mormon mommies, it's unsurprising that plastic surgery is popular. Abraham is telling me that he's really, really hungry and to please finish filming the video so that he can eat. And to that I say, great timing, buddy, because that was the end of my outline. This was crazy. This was crazy. I had so much fun putting this video together. It also took a lot of time. I was researching for like a solid week, and I am off of work right now, so I was putting in hours. But I hope you guys had a fun time. I know I did. Did I convince you? Are you a convert? Do you believe that the Capitol is in Salt Lake City? Please let me know either way. If you think it's somewhere else, I would love to hear why you think that. And yeah, please like this video, subscribe if you enjoyed your time here. You can turn on notifications to know when I release a new one. And if you want to stick around for the next 13 of these videos in this series, let me know which district you want me to cover next. Again, most of them will not be this long, but who knows? Maybe I'll fall down more rabbit holes. In fact, I'll probably fall down more rabbit holes. Will it be this long of a rabbit hole, this deep of one? That remains to be seen. Okay, anyways, I really am going to finish up. It has gotten dark since I started this, and now I have to edit it. So much work, but I think it'll be worth it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. Okay, I'm going to go for real. Bye!